All right. Welcome into the Sandcrawler. We're on Volume 2, Episode 2. This is Daniel doing the intro today. We'll alternate that. I'm here with my co-host, Jeff. And as you can see for our YouTube viewers and listeners, we actually have like some stuff on the screen. We won't try to rely on it too heavily because I know that we're trying to do this as a podcast forum. But visual aids, they help. For today's episode, as with many of our episodes, we'll try to make them not only topical and relevant to the time, but I also want to make sure that they have some staying power. And by that, I mean, like you can see, we're going to get into Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 3. But rather than just reacting to it, which we will, but rather than just reacting to it, I'd really like to get into some of the stuff that, some of the lore building that it did, and some of what it introduced for the larger context of Star Wars and how that might affect the future and the current and everything like that in the canon. And so we'll make sure that it's not just a reaction. Obviously, Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 4 is going to come out in like 5 days. And we want to make sure that, this episode's still worthy of your listen. So we'll get into relevant topics like that. So we're going to hit Mandalorian Season 3, Episode 3. We're going to get into a segment that we're going to start for the podcast called, we haven't named it yet, but it is essentially the Essential Guide. So some elaborate name. If our listeners want to chime in with a proposed name, we'll take it under advice. But basically an opportunity for us to dive into a particular planet, species, character, maybe things like that in the Star Wars universe that, again, have staying power and will be relevant a week from today. So today we've chosen the planet Duro and their native species Duros. And Jeff and I will wax philosophical a little bit about that species. And then we'll wrap it up with a giveaway. Yes, a giveaway. Finally, a real giveaway. It's going to happen. It's going to be great. Man, I sounded like a former president right there. At any rate, we're going to do a giveaway where it's going to be very simple. The rules, we'll get into it a little bit later, but we're not going to make this a very involved giveaway. You're not going to have a whole lot of obligation. We want you to follow us on Instagram at the Sandcrawler Podcast. And we would like you to send us the code word, which we'll give away later in the show. And that's it. No tagging us, no reposting, no letting friends know, no broadcasting. Follow and send us the word. So, Jeff, after that introduction, anything else you want to get into before we dive into Mando in the introduction? Otherwise, I'll be happy to turn it over to you to discuss a little Mandalorian Episode 3.
Definitely follow us, because I think we have enough of a treasure trove of stuff that, I'm going to guess 20 episodes in, and we're probably going to start to give away really cool stuff. Not that the micro machines aren't really cool, Daniel, but I could see myself, we get to the holiday time, I may be feeling a bit benevolent, and maybe we give away a sideshow or a Hot Toy figure. I just don't know. But that should be incentive enough for you all to listen. Santa might come a little bit early. So, yeah, on that note, I'm all in favor of anything we can do to buy your listenership and your patronage. But yeah, feel free to jump into Mando. I thought this week's was I have mixed feelings, but I'll let you jump in, and then I'll kind of give you my 2 cents.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I did a heavy lift on the intro, so I don't want to talk or take over the conversation. But I will say this: it didn't end up being the greatest Mandalorian episode ever, but the opening scene, I actually thought it was going to turn into being the best Mandalorian episode of all time. But I also rolled the dice and thought to myself, if this scene was so masterfully done, are we about to see kind of a snoozer? And I'm not going to go so far as to call it that. I thought it was like a pretty solid entry into the Mandoverse and into the greater post Return of the Jedi Disney era of Star Wars. I thought that it showed a lot of cool stuff in terms of Coruscant, which we'll get into in a little bit. The opening and then the closing, where we actually see Mando, Din Djarin, and Bo-Katan, and all of that. I thought that was really interesting and intriguing, and good for the Mandalorian plot. And then I thought that the stuff with Dr. Pershing and Elia Kane, I think,
Yeah.
the Moff Gideon's communications officer, formerly perhaps, um, and like those scenes, I appreciated them more for how they expanded the general lore of Star Wars, rather than how they expanded on the Mandalorian's story itself. So I liked seeing the New Republic in action. Dr. Pershing presented in the Opera House, which you might have recognized from Revenge of the Sith. And so it was cool how they repurposed that as kind of the New Republic. We'll call it the Senate. Um, and they clearly weren't using like the actual senatorial auditorium, and they weren't at Imperial Palace, which is a pretty strong statement. So there's a few things that happened that we saw. There were some Easter eggs. We don't need to get into all of that, but Jeff, let me throw it to you. Where are you at with that episode? What did you think?
So the opening with all of the sort of TIE Interceptor hive, or the TIE Interceptor fleet, was awesome. And I think outside of Return of the Jedi, like, we haven't really been able to see a TIE swarm like that. So I was pretty excited because, to your point,
Mhm.
the direction of that was getting exciting. And then I actually thought for a minute towards the end of that sequence where Bo-Katan is chasing the remaining 2 or 3 TIE bombers, and then suddenly they hit another wave, and I think Din Djarin makes the comment, like, there's no reason that, like, there's no way that an Imperial warlord has that much at his disposal. Did part of you wonder if we were going to get a little bit of a Thrawn tease in that? Like, I it
Yeah,
crossed
yeah.
my mind.
So
I didn't think we were going to see Thrawn, but, like, I wondered if that was sort of a foreshadowing to, like, we were going to see a capital ship, and then suddenly it was going to be like, well, you know who that is, and so that
right.
part was, yeah, that part was cool to me. That sequence was very fun. To use the expression we used last week, I think my wife and I were watching, we kind of joked, and she said the same thing, like, oh, such good Star Wars candy. And it really was. It was very reminiscent with, like, the cockpit sequences from, like, the over the shoulder view and sort of the camera angle. It felt very, this is probably pretty on the nose, but it felt very like X-Wing TIE Fighter to me, the old game. And I was
Sure.
pretty excited by that. Like, even the targeting. So I really liked that whole sequence. Good fun, and we kind of know where Bo-Katan's sort of general plot arc is going to go. Agreed on Coruscant, by the way. The thing I said to my wife when that sequence happened and we saw, like, the Rebel Alliance insignia kind of on some of these buildings was, this is the first time I've ever seen Coruscant, post Imperial
Yeah.
destruction or dissolution. Like, this is the New Republic. I liked that, and I
Yep.
actually really enjoyed the sequences where the Mon Cala that were there, and then also some of the robots. Like, they kind of paint that picture of, not that the New Republic's not sinister, but uh, there's sort of like the veneer of friendliness that belies a darker intent that all,
Yep.
like, large systematic governments would have. And I really like when we get to see that version of either the Rebel Alliance, like in Rogue One with some of those intelligence operatives, or like what we got to see where that robots obviously appears to be, good and helpful, but in reality, like, there's an ulterior motive at play, or there's, government indoctrination. I thought that was really cool. I'm a little bit probably different from you on the perspective of what occurred, I would say, in, like, the middle 70% of that episode. And it's not that I don't appreciate, to your point, the atmosphere building and the world building that existed, because it was good. I struggled a little bit with her acting, but beyond that, the point that they were trying to make or set up, which was evident from the moment that you saw those two characters, her and the whoever that unnamed individual was in the opera house with her, like, it's very evident to the viewer that they're not working on the side of the Republic. And so I didn't think you needed 40 minutes to set up either what I could kind of glean was going to be, one, an assassination, which it kind of ultimately ended up being of sorts, or
Yeah.
two, like, the reveal that she's really not reformed. I, the Pershing stuff is fine. Again, I think it's important, and it obviously is going to drive the plot forward with, like, Force sensitives, but that's a lot of economy to bake out of an episode on a limited arc to kind of just go back and forth. And I hate to say it, with
Yep.
some relatively flat dialogue. Now, again, to that point, I did enjoy the world building a little bit of Coruscant. I thought there were some funny little, things, like even the going back to my original point, like the little litter cleaning up robot was very funny to me, because it's like they're going out of their way to make their New Republic seem like they're that much better. And so again, the tongue-in-cheek stuff like that, I definitely enjoyed. And I would tell you, by the end of the episode too, I was a fan again of going back to the armor and all those that collective of Mando, as far as them welcoming Bo-Katan into their tribe, or whatever their clan. I think my only comment would be, and it's not a critique, it's just sort of as we work through this series, I know that the intent of using like 40 minutes to set up that side plot with pushing in like the clone technology and all that is going to lead somewhere. But my question is, like, can that not just be covered with some pretty well written exposition that just maybe takes a third of that time? Because what I was seeing online, and I don't know if you saw this too, but like I kind of saw the same consensus over the last like 72 hours, which was like, hey, this was really cool. And like, do not get me wrong, it was very well constructed. I know that you were talking a lot about like the inspiration. I'll let you talk a little bit about that, like from some of the concept art originally, of course not. So I'm also very open to like taking in the atmosphere and the aesthetic of just sort of the set dressing. But at the same time, I think as the viewer, especially in this type of program that's not going to be on the same tone as, for example, like an Andor, I expect them to kind of get to it, right? Not every episode has to be like a slam dunk, but I don't know. Is that fair? Am I being too cynical? I hope I'm not, because I did enjoy it.
No, all valid criticism. All valid criticism. Look, like, it's the last point that you made is actually one that I was going to lead with in my response, and I think it was very apt. It almost seemed like this was Mando's counterpunch to Andor, saying like, we can do that too, you guys. And it was problematic because Mando doesn't have the same thematic tones as Andor, and that's perfectly fine. Like, we're not here to bash Mando. Like, it reignited my excitement for Star Wars, and I don't think, at least my appreciation and understanding of Star Wars moving forward. It's what keeps kind of my hope alive that will continue to get good content. So this is obviously, if we're being critical, it's because it's like we're being critical of like a parent or a child or a someone that we love. Having said that, first of all, before I get into other things, the volume continues to be terrible. For our listeners, the volume is basically the green screen that they're using when they have actors trying to walk around. It was used in Obi-Wan. It's used obviously in Mando. It is not used in Andor, or if it is very limited use in Andor, because they actually they spend their budget on the sets versus everything else. So and location shooting. The volume is like a big dome, and it's a green screen. Like, you can walk there, you can have like different lighting. There are instances in which it's the technology looks pretty good. There's a canceled show on Netflix called 1899 by the same people who made a show called Dark, which is incredible. 1899 wasn't so good, so it got canceled. But they used the volume heavily in that, and it actually looked pretty good. In the earlier Mando episode and in this one, it looks so bad. Like, I like, why are you not using a green screen, or why are you not using like like a real metal platform on a train, like just the window sill of a real train, and then put something behind it? It just really looked like WB graphics CGI for me, and it takes me out of the universe, because Star Wars should be known for pushing the bill on technology. So getting that out of the way, like, and focusing more on kind of the story part of that. Yeah, like, it didn't need to be so long. They definitely didn't need to take the time to get that point across. It's fine. Like I don't understand the point of character development when you've fried the character's brain. And Elia is a is less of a character and more of like a plot device. So she didn't need really that character development anyways. And quite honestly, even as straightforward as it was, I'm a little bit confused. I think that we all saw the signs that clearly she was not with the New Republic, right? Like you had said, clearly there was some ulterior motive for her befriending and getting along with Pershing. I think we all saw that. What what I didn't notice, or what I thought was a little bit confusing for me, and maybe you can explain it better than than I understood it. Um, First of all, okay, so we're to believe at least the New Republic that at least the New Republic believes that she's like a good double agent, that she's good at entrapment, which is completely a philosophy that a good government shouldn't have. To one of your earlier points, but that they trust her with entrapment missions. So someone who's like who even Dr. Pershing knew shouldn't be trusted because she's part of Moff Gideon's crew, which carries the implication of a post-Empire warlord who has unquestioned loyalty from people who serve him and who already knew that the Empire was destroyed and continued to serve him. So, of course, them coming to the New Republic should be questioned, but they make her a double agent. And then you realize that she's still working with Gideon, but which I thought all of that made sense, but then she scrambles his brain. What I thought was going to happen was she uses him thinking that he is helping the New Republic when actually she's siphoning
Right.
off the work for Gideon. And at some point maybe he realizes it and he becomes okay with it again because it's his life work or whatever. Or maybe he has like a crisis a crisis of conscience or whatever, and bows out. What I didn't see happening was them like scrambling his brain. If they wanted him gone, like she had ample opportunity to kill him, just push him off the damn train. At a point that didn't land at apparently like the pillow packing factory, by the way.
That was a bit much as far as like because I kept thinking like, are they gonna jump? Here's where my head was going. Like, I thought she was a triple agent, and I thought that the idea was gonna be like in a lot of these movies, and I'm going to make this one reference. I'm not even going to explain it, but you're going to laugh. I thought this was going to be like an old, like Nun Luger plan style thing where she was going to like,
debate.
Yeah, she was going to bring him out. And then suddenly we were going to see that old guy. And maybe we were going to see some Imperial Remnant guys. And they're like, by the way, like, bud, you're coming back with us. Like there's too much knowledge in that brain. We had to get you off of like the core part of, the capital area or wherever the rehabilitation area was, to like, or I thought like the Star Destroyer door was going to open, and then we were going to see like a gaggle of Imperial guys that were like, "All right, you're coming with us." Yeah. Like, but and even to the point where once he was on the table, I actually thought she was going to turn it off, and there was going to be some kind of escape, and then we were going to understand why she was okay. Like the triple agent plot is like she had to get something else to turn him in. I never really, to your point, like it never made sense, and I hate to sound this, but like I'm not so sure that intellectually that's actually baked out either. Because I will tell you, like,
okay. So I'm at least not crazy that it is that they took what could have been straightforward and they confused it unnecessarily.
That's right. Because I would also just tell you constructively for how that episode was even like shot and some of the lines and the acting, that if there was any kind of like sort of editorial, like real oversight or copy it, and this isn't a critique, like they would have gone back and been like, by the way, like one other thing that needs to be clearly explained is this. So much so, by the way, like on the point of like Star Wars editing and what have you, that we talked about it on the last episode, but that's a real thing from a truly sort of like producer and or like director perspective, because the question was at the end of Empire Strikes Back, like, how are we going to explain or show the fact that like Luke Skywalker, like, how did they get away at the end? So we need to like show them on this thing. To your original point though, like that's where I'm going, is to say I would have thought somebody, if they really knew, like Filoni or Favreau would be like, by the way, like we need to explain, like let's do another shot of her communicating with whoever Gideon's replacement is, or her communicating with an unnamed Imperial Remnant guy.
Sure.
I think they just sort of meandered through, and for whatever reason, that's just how it was executed, so it's fine. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll get more. Like maybe maybe we'll see something in the coming couple of episodes where it's like, oh, okay, like I guess that makes sense. Which is one of the problems when it comes to the serial presentation of any Star Wars, where you might have questions and then it's later explained, but in the meantime, you asking those questions isn't actually wrong. So, like when Mandalorian is told for the very first time, like, oh, you removed your helmet, like you're no longer Mandalorian. Or we as Mandalorians never remove our helmets. And then everyone, posts on the internet, like, here's all these examples of every Mandalorian you've ever seen in Star Wars canon taking their helmet off. And then you find out, like, oh, okay, they're part of like this this cult religious group that isn't part of like the greater Mandalorian culture. So that makes sense now. This one tracks a little bit different because that was more of an inconsistency versus something that's just outright confusing for no reason. But yeah, we can leave it at that. Like, again, I thought it was cool to kind of see, to your point, the New Republic isn't isn't like this benevolent government that's peace and kumbaya for all. They have their own motives as well. And to leave on a positive note for Mando, that episode, or at least the segment on Coruscant. We can get into the Mando parts of it in a minute. I liked this part. I'll show you. Like, our listeners on YouTube will be able to see this. Podcast listeners will not, but you can do a quick Google search and figure it out. Right now, we're looking at like a still from the show where Dr. Pershing and the officer went to Mount, I think it was called Umate, and they went out to basically to just like cityscape and everything, looked around. And then I want you to take a look at this Ralph McQuarrie design art, which has like very similar towers. It has the similar light up stuff. I don't know if this segment we're looking at kind of in the middle is like a mountain or just kind of like a fountain plaza, but this is clearly like Filoni and Favreau touch to say like, hey, this is what we designed based off of this look. And like that part was just the chef's kiss, because I love it when Filoni does that kind of stuff, and he does it often. And we'll get into that when we get into kind of Duro and Duros and how those elements have been used directly and indirectly in Star Wars. But I was a big fan of that because as we talk about a lot, we're both huge McQuarrie fans. Love his stuff. So Jeff, I'll turn it back. Were there any final thoughts? Was there anything else about the episodes, particularly with, I guess, the Mandalorian aspect? So we're glad that, like, I think that Bo-Katan probably had. I thought this after the second episode, that having seen the mythosaur, that she had like a religious epiphany.
Yeah.
And might be a true believer. And I think her withholding it from Din Djarin, what she saw, is maybe like her trying to be selfish about a decision that she believes that she had a vision. Like the proverbial burning bush, but she actually saw something. And maybe that's like her avenue to claim the right to rule Mandalore once again. I thought it was all pretty well done. From what I understand, Grogu actually also said this is the way at some point in the episode.
Yeah.
So that was kind of cool. Those like his first words, guys. Those are his first words from besides like cute crap that we hear him say. So I loved that. I've said this in previous episodes, but obviously our unless we forwarded you an advanced copy for editorial reasons, no one has heard this. I always watch stuff in closed caption because there's so much that you miss when you don't, because there are things that are literally not audible, but they will tell you in the closed caption. And also it helps with like who said what, because you will see that like, oh, that character is supposed to be this guy, and like that's supposed to be that guy. So it's really helpful. But yeah, I thought that the Mando stuff was good, and let me toss it to you.
You're just old. Don't try to make it about how you're absorbing the content. We're just old. We're getting old. We can't hear. I do it all the time.
Fine.
My last observation on that point about Mando, and then we can flip over. Prediction, and I love making Star Wars predictions with the Mando because I'm only right like 10% of the time, but I like to make very audacious predictions. I remember like as an aside, like when we were getting to the finale of Book of Boba Fett and like we saw the Luke episode, I was like, okay, my prediction is that like Han Solo, Boss, Dengar, like I was like so stuff and excited by it that like I was clearly not thinking clearly. But my actual prediction, and I feel like this is a very rational one, is that Paz Vizsla, who is the heavy Mandalorian that's voiced by Jon Favreau, who's sort of been like, kind of this like little tertiary supporting type character. There was a sequence at the end of that where, when they welcomed them into the
convent, let's call it.
Yeah, Paz has always been like, it always seems like he's sort of like the detractor, like the dissenter, and that he plays sort of the role of the overseer, if you will, like that sort of traditional archetype. He's the big man at arms that's always overseeing as you described, the convent.
Yeah, I mean, he's a bouncer. He's a bouncer, basically. Yeah.
He's loyal to that. Well, I would tell you, since he perceives himself as sort of the enforcer, the way they did the parting shot of sort of him looking, what I got from that was a sort of suspicious or he was like gearing up for a challenge. I think what will happen is in some form or fashion at the end of the season this is not a big prediction. Like the Darksaber will have to fall to Bo-Katan, but I feel like if you know the name Vizsla and Clan Vizsla and like who Pre Vizsla was and his relationship to Bo-Katan and like even the comments that Paz Vizsla made to her when she showed up, like your clan no longer exists, and the fact that his ancestor once wielded, or his, I would assume, relative once wielded the Darksaber. Like, are we gearing up for a showdown, if you will, between him and Bo-Katan or him and the Mando? I'm going to guess probably him and Bo-Katan, because it would line up to what we saw in the Clone Wars, where again, like, and I don't, admittedly, this is embarrassing, I don't remember his exact relation, if it's even been clarified, to Pre Vizsla, but knowing Pre Vizsla's sort of like fate, knowing what happened to Mandalore once he lost the Darksaber, like I'm curious to see if like, and also stepping out of the world for a minute, like selfishly, this might be the moment where Favreau kind of like inserts himself more into the property as sort of like a character. Not that he would be a star, but like
he's not M. Night Shyamalan about it, but yeah.
And he's not quite Tarantino about it, but like I do think I think he would like give himself enough of a role. So again, silly prediction, but I think I'm going to call it. I think we're headed to a move where he's involved trying to reclaim the Darksaber, and there's some sort of reference back to, his ancestor Pre Vizsla.
I think that's fair. Yeah, they're all a part of clan or House Vizsla. So there in Mandalorian culture, there is bloodline, but they also take adoptives. And so he's you might, for all intents and purposes, if he's not blood related, he's considered to be blood related. He takes on the name and the representation of that house. And yeah, I mean, Vizsla was the first person to wield the Darksaber as part of his first Mandalorian to join the Jedi Knights, or the Jedi Order. And then, Mando's apparently at some point broke in and stole the Darksaber back, brought it all back. There's some great lore behind it. And we can get into it at some point. Did you notice how Bo-Katan was swinging that thing around like it was fairly light? Her and both Sabine have used the Darksaber without any indication that it becomes heavy or through its use.
Yeah, no, that's why I'm convinced we're just setting up for Bo to take it over as the rightful heir. And of course, like we did the classic.
And then Sabine takes over because she's the best.
Here comes the Sabine fanboy. I knew it would come out at some point. It came out on one of our old Rebels episodes, and I was like, "Oh my god, dude!" But
I simp hard. I simp real hard over Sabine.
I also think the destruction of her castle is like the very sort of not to sound like elitist as I like adjust my tie, but like it's that like classic literary trope of like the rightful ruler has like their kingdom and their homeland like destroyed as like a microcosm of Mandalore. Yeah. She has to make it right by rebuilding and reclaiming what's really hers, like sort of her coming of age, ascendancy to the throne. So I'm excited. Again, all that set aside, and I'll end on the positive note on this front too. I agree. Like, I'm always willing in Star Wars to overlook chunks of, I wouldn't even go so far as to call it mediocrity, but just maybe different pacing. But I am very excited to see where this season goes, because I would also say Mandalorian has like never disappointed as far as like its ultimate payoff. And when you look at something like Book of Boba Fett and you look at the way that came into being and then what ultimately the big payoff there was, yeah, don't get me wrong, like that was like the big sort of Universal Studios moment, like we're going to do all the stuff and Robert Rodriguez is going to go crazy. With Mando, it's always been treated with, as we talked about different tones of Star Wars shows, there's a little bit more of the gravitas here, and then what I would classify it as like more like legacy building. So that's why we got Luke, and we got Ahsoka, and you can go through that list. I'm very excited to see what the big sort of reveals are this season.
Yeah.
We're obviously building to something like really cool.
He's gonna ride a mythosaur. We know it. He's gonna ride it.
That's
someone is. I should say. Someone's riding a mythosaur.
That's fair. Sure.
All right, man. Well, that caps it on Mandalorian episode 3. There was obviously more, but again, we're moving along. We're keeping a good pace on the podcast. We're not going to deliver any 2-hour podcast that no one has time to listen to, and that you just look at and you're like, no. So we'll move to our next topic of the planet Duro and the people, the Duros people. So the Duro is real close. The Duros system has Corellia, it has Duro. It is as you can see, like right here, it actually, the planet Duro meets on 2 different trade routes, the Corellian Run and then the Corellian Trade Spine. It's like the fork for that. It's very close to Coruscant. And there's a couple of, again, for our YouTube watchers, there's a couple of other places that I circled on the map to give you some reference for other cool stuff in Star Wars. But with that, the planet Duro itself is home to the Duros people, or the Duro people. I'm sorry. The planet is Duro. The people are Duros with an S. This is what they look like. For those, again, that aren't watching, they are bluish green aliens. They're humanoid, basically. 2 arms, 2 legs, stand upright. They have big bulbous heads, no hair, big red eyes, no nose, and then like an elongated going down to their face.
They look to me like the most typical gray alien, like they have
Yes.
that like normal alien look. That's like what Cad Bane species is. But like of all the aliens in Star Wars, to me, they look like, if you imagine just a regular gray alien, instead of like gray skin, it's blue, and instead of black eyes, red. Like that's how I think of them. But.
Yeah, I think that's a really apt description. They show up very, very early on in Star Wars lore. They used to be called like Goggle Eyes before, because they didn't even have a species name yet. So these are people. They're in A New Hope, right? So they're in Chalmun's Cantina. Chalmun is a Wookiee, by the way. I learned that recently. I didn't know that before. So this is of course the cantina where Luke and Obi-Wan go to meet Han Solo, the infamous cantina. So the 2 Duros there, they go by a lot of different names because they're a little bit nefarious in their workings. Owen Damal and Chachi Damal. They have a couple of aliases, like I said, Elor's Matic and Bringe for Owen, and Banis Keeg and Probos for Chachi. Husband and wife, they work with the Hutts. They actually own Docking Bay 94. Little tidbit for you there. And they were pretty angry when Han Solo blasted out without paying for his parking. Blew the gates off of that. And so these two Duros that owned Docking Bay 94, pretty angry with Jabba. They used to work with him, and they got pretty angry afterwards and stopped. So what are they doing though on Tatooine? Jeff, do you want to get into a little bit of the planet, a little bit of background there? There's some interesting facts that you want to drop on our pals?
Elorsmatic, by the way, who's Owen Demal. Side note, I have a custom-made 1/6 figure of her, so that's a random pull. Don't know why. So yeah, cool thing about Corellia. When Daniel said we wanted to talk about Corellia, there's sort of three ways to think about it. There's what's known as Daniel described, sort of the Corellian sector, which is the broad sort of all-encompassing space that has a number of planets. There's the actual Corellian system, which is a number of these planets. Duros is one of them. There's a few others. Salonia is the other big one, that include basically different planets and different species as part of that sort of solar system, if you will. And then there's the actual planet Corellia, which we won't really talk about today. Side note, like Salonia and Duro are probably my favorite, side planets. One, because Salonia is populated by otter people, and Duro
Yes.
has the actual Duro species. So as one of those sort of core planets, my favorite thing about the Duros people is that they are largely responsible in the lore for creating like hyperspace travel and basically enabling the concept of like true intergalactic travel for the galaxy. But the really short version is, effectively it was a planet that was serious to a number of like environmental plague, externality, pollution. The planet effectively became inhospitable and still is, but
largely due to their own mining in advancement of hyperspace and travel technology.
Yeah.
Yep.
They mainly live in these sort of like platforms that orbit the actual planet itself. It is a corporatocracy, like most of the Corellian system is. And I would say the interesting thing about the Corellian system, including the planet Duro, is that whether you're talking about Corellian humans versus like Coruscanti humans or the Duros people or Salonians, they're all like fiercely independent, and they all have these sort of like personalities and dispositions on the whole, to generalize, that make them very different and very autonomous, even from the New Republic in like the current lore, or even in the old expanded universe lore. The thing I thought that my favorite thing about them just generally, and like what makes them considered like Corellian in the sense of like they're part of it, is that generally they've always had a tight relationship with the actual sector itself. They always saw themselves as sort of separate, but they definitely again established themselves as players. They are, I think of them, to generalize again, as sort of like the spacefaring civilization of all of the species. Like they are truly pioneers and explorers. If you ever have a chance to take a look at the Fantasy Flight games, and I think it's actually technically out of print, even though Disney did sponsor it, it's basically the D&D equivalent in the Star Wars universe. Gosh, there's such a wealth of content. Daniel and I each have like entire source books dedicated to the Corellian sector.
Yes,
and so
we do.
It gets really into like what the planet of Duro is like, the economics of the planet. The Duro, I think it's like the Starship, right, shipyards. That's like part of the big Starship Guild that they're part of. And in that, basically, you have what's known as the Corellian Engineering Corporation. They are like the, to equate them to our modern sort of current world, like Sinar Systems or Income. They're like the Boeing and the Lockheeds and the Raytheons. Like they're this giant, basically Starship Guild conglomeration. But it's cool because, again, like when you have species like this that have such strong identities, they have such technological capabilities, and I would say just generally cultural autonomy, it always allows them in the lore of Star Wars to remain not totally separated from sort of even like the wrath or the control of the Empire, because the Empire does like occupy these planets at its peak, but they never really try to disrupt it because they provide such economic stability and like I would just say benefit to the galaxy as a whole. It'd be like invading Switzerland. Why? And so again, like that's one of the really cool things I've always liked about them, is like they have sort of this autonomous personality or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I would tell you too, like the interesting thing for me was that for them at the end of the Clone Wars, sort of as I remember this, like when the Empire was basically trying to secure up and either make these like colonial worlds or outposts, basically like the Duros people basically like fled. And that's also kind of what allowed them to maintain sort of their control and their autonomy. Like you can take the planet, like there's nothing here for us of note, right? Like it's a bombed out wasteland. You can try to nationalize the resources, but like there's no reason to do that. But
yeah, I wanted to get into that a little bit. That's interesting. So everyone's going to tussle with the Empire to an extent, right? The Empire obviously took advantage of the resources there, but the Duros people were the ones that started all of the mining and started like all of the bad things that happened to the planet. The Empire exacerbated them, but didn't do that much worse. And what was odd to me is that because the Duros people are such a like spacefaring, traveling, adventurous kind of people, they were very much meh about the destruction of their home world and the fact that they couldn't go back there. They were like, whatever. We'll go travel somewhere else, which I thought is like a very interesting trait. Like it's always good. I don't like a concept where aliens are basically just palette swaps of humans that think the same way, that have like the same values, that care about the same things, et cetera, et cetera. So the idea that humans would obviously today care a great deal if Earth was destroyed, as we have not colonized, but in a similar position, like even humans in the Star Wars galaxy, I don't know that there is a home world, quote unquote, for humans. I don't think that they ever actually announced that, but certainly if there was a primarily or almost entirely human planet that was destroyed or ravaged, I think that the humans in there would kind of feel for it.
It goes back to like the mythology where like in their universe as a whole, there's like the concept of the celestial, so how they think of God. And like what I do know is like I have read a little bit just on that topic that the evolutionary development was no different than it was here in like real world Earth, where effectively humans were primates that eventually evolved. But from a planetary perspective, I don't think it's ever clear. And that's interesting, right? Because going back to the Duros, if you remember in episode 1, there's the Nemoidians. They're the characters. So one of the first worlds that the Duros colonized was Nemoidia, and those species which are distinctly different, and they are a different race and a different species, like they are still effectively biological cousins, and you can see enough of the similarities.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of the other thing too, is there's sort of this racial / class problem where they talk about in especially in the New Republic years, like how did Nemoidians perceive the Duros and vice versa. So all that to say, like you could actually probably teach an entire undergraduate course on, I would argue, like just some of the, on any number of these like planets or systems.
Yeah.
Because there's so much content that's created. Like people joke about how like Tolkien created a language, and so to like add more to Lord of his language, he wrote Lord of the Rings. I would tell you like the level of depth that exists for this kind of stuff. I mean, we'll never talk about it on a podcast, but if you really wanted to go read about like the economic composition of how like the Corellian sector does business, and you mentioned at the beginning like the significance of the Corellian trade route, somebody's written about it. It's deep.
Yeah.
It goes very deep. So we're giving you truly like a waterfall of information very quickly, but we're not even scratching the surface. So again, all that to say, like it's a very interesting system. They were also one of like the alien races, in my opinion, that was overlooked as a Cantina alien, but obviously came to prominence once like Filoni and Lucas went and did a look back, and then hence we had the creation and the introduction of Cad Bane. And he, to me, is one of my favorite characters. He's now iconic, and I think that also helped bring that alien species to the forefront of kind of the Star Wars, frontal cortex, if you will, right? See, because for a long time, we saw Rhodians and Twi'leks and Wookiees, and I would say Duros are now just as much a part of that.
Yeah, I love it. There's also a 375 inch, so the 18th scale, the small version of action figures that has Elor's Madak, and he was not created. He was like a fan. He was a fan's choice vote, and so it's good, to your point, to see that like Duros are getting their due independently now that Cad Bane is probably, when you look at characters that haven't been in a Star Wars movie, notwithstanding the fact that Clone Wars was technically released with a pilot movie in theaters, I think it's real safe to say, from my perspective, that Ahsoka, Rex, and Cad Bane are the 3 coolest content characters that, I gotta be careful because of the novels. But they probably still, even so, are probably still the three coolest characters I've been created that have never actually been in a movie.
Yeah.
So Cad Bane goes a long way towards that. He's getting a Hot Toys toy. He's got a couple of releases and a couple of different action figure lines. He's a really prominent character overall in Clone Wars, and clearly, obviously, he came back in Book of Boba Fett. And so, yeah, I mean, Duros people they play a pretty big role. They, interestingly, they actually have like the same lifespan, if not marginally shorter than actual real life humans. So you run into like a 75-year-old Duros. That's old, man. That's old for them. Like Cad Bane I can't believe he didn't have a walker. Um, but so they have that. But before they became a corporatocracy, apparently one of their queens lived to the age of 200. So, and like this is a ridiculous thing, right? Like I'm talking about a queen in a fake history of a fake planet in the fake universe, and I'm talking about something that happened thousands of years before the story that didn't happen that we're talking about now. But I just thought it was interesting that like they actually had they probably embellished their own history. I doubt that if a lifespan of a species is approximately 75 years to 80 years, that you're pushing 200. I just don't think that's possible. I don't think there's any 200-year-old human. So
No,
it's interesting that stories that like even the authors and the content creators will take that into account to like embellish for the sake of that's what those people in universe would do for their own stories. So the Duros people.
I love it. Check it out. And I would also encourage anybody for probably next to nothing. Actually, I could be totally wrong on that. The source books on Amazon are very cool. I'm saying Amazon because that's the easiest, excuse me, easiest way to go get the Fantasy Flight books because I think they are long out of print.
Yeah.
But
they're going to start getting really pricey when people when they get snagged. If something happens in the new content, Filoni pulls from these. He pulls directly from these. If our for our YouTube folks, like the Fantasy Flight, we're using the Fantasy Flight map. Everything that we've displayed is from Fantasy Flight games. I claim no copyright on this stuff. But like the 5 trade routes that are indicated by different colors that look kind of like a train map, those were mentioned expressly in an earlier episode of Mando when you see the class that the classroom that's being defended by Cobb Vanth in that town. Like the protocol droids talking about the 5 major trade routes of the galaxy. These are that. So like Filoni pulls from this stuff, and once more people figure that out and start trying to like one up him or guess where he's going next or figure out what plot points are or learn more about things that he's inserted. I mean, these are the places to go, and I cannot overstate that. Like I read word for word some of the stuff. The ships the ship that the Night Owls and Bo-Katan and Mando helped steal in last season. That's a ship that you can buy in the Fantasy Flight game, and it has all kinds of stats. Like it's described. So I don't like this isn't an episode on those books, but they are an amazing place to go for that information.
and also you're exactly right. There were 3 series. I won't dwell on this. There were 3 sort of avenues by which the Fantasy Flight role-playing game could be played. And Edge of the Empire obviously focuses more on the the scum and villainy, if you will. The Age of Rebellion books, as I understand them, Daniel, because they aggregate both early Disney content, but also truly what they're now classifying as Legends content. But like the wealth of biographical and like encyclopedic knowledge that existed for the EU, those source books, like I missed the boat on those 3 years ago because they were already as I remember, like Age of Rebellion was already like it was up to like $250.
Yeah.
Book. And I'm like, oh geez, like this comes back to a theme I'm going to bring up in every episode of our podcast, which comes back to us being like protectors of the holocron. Like that was one more thing that I now know is being slowly, siphoned out of the market, but I desperately want to get my hands on because it's going to become only rarer and rarer. But anyways, I digress. All that to say, yes, go check them out. They're very cool. And the artwork in them, we talk about Ralph McQuarrie, give him a lot of credit, man. In these Fantasy Flight books, the artwork, especially of Duros and like some of the nightscapes and the fact that they'll give you, this isn't even considered an exhaustive list, but like 150 different ships and like a biography on like each ship type, and you know, people that are in certain sectors and what they're doing and all that, like they're fun. It's a worthy read. So yeah.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. I am looking, I mean, I'm looking forward to our next segment where we dive in, and we'll definitely use these guys as these books as source material. So without further ado, contest. Here we are. Giveaway, not a contest, not a contest. It's a giveaway. You don't have to do anything except for the following things that you have to do. Follow us on Instagram at The Sandcrawler Podcast. There are no underlines. There are no spaces. It is, for all intents and purposes, one word, The Sandcrawler Podcast on Instagram. We are on Podbean. We're on pretty much every podcast platform except for Apple, because despite giving them as many credit cards as I have, they still are telling me I do not have a payment method on file for a service I don't need to pay for. We'll get it figured out. Anyways, send us the code word LORS. Send it to our the Sandcrawler Podcast Instagram account. Send it as a direct message. I'll see that you, or Jeff will see that you are following. We will see that you have sent us the word. The first 10 listeners, and that's all you have to do. That's all you have to do. Send us this word. And follow us. You don't have to tell anybody else. You don't have to put it in your stories. You don't have to tag your friends. We might make you do all of that stuff later for a different giveaway, but for this one, you do not have to. You will get a Micro Machines Sandcrawler shipped to you in the U.S. Oh my God, please, U.S. only. I'm not shipping to Denmark. Let us know, and we'll send you something out. And we'll go from there. And like Jeff said, the giveaways will get bigger and better. We are not above buying listenership. So with that, since I opened, Jeff, I'm going to let you sign us off on this one.
All right. Yeah. I echo your sentiments. I'm not shipping to some crazy far off country. I've already made this mistake a few times. But we'll make it work. We like our international listeners. I thought this was a solid week of Mando content. I'm excited for next week. We will graciously welcome any feedback too. And I actually think, Daniel, one thing we forgot to mention, but we should start doing, as it would be befitting of ourselves and other members of the Star Wars community, and as gigantic nerds, I'm sure I misspoke in this episode, and I'm sure you misspoke too. And if there are corrections, we will probably do like a 2-minute corrections on subsequent episodes. Look, I am audacious and arrogant enough to claim that I'm a Star Wars expert, but I am certainly wrong a lot. And I know you feel the same way too. So, hey, if something bothered you, let us know. We'll run a corrections or a revision, if you will, at the end.
And we'll give you a shout out. We'll give you a shout out on the show, which might not seem like much now, because it'll be like me and Jeff listening, but eventually, you know, when we get big and famous, we'll give you a shout, and people will listen. Like, man, those guys, that they got corrected. They pretty good job at Star Wars Nerd 55.
We're also going to do our level best to try to bring on some guests of repute in the Star Wars community. We have some ideas. I'm not going to talk about it, but it's forthcoming. So know that not every episode is just going to be us waxing philosophical. We'll probably start doing some pretty cool interviews. But yeah, generally, Daniel, I think too, we'll talk a little bit about, these sort of deep dives. We'll pull from the essential guides, the fantasy flight guides. If you guys think this is worthwhile, we want to try to mix it up every week and make sure that you're taking something from it and you're having fun. So we appreciate the listenership. And I would just say thank you again, and may the Force be with you.
May the Force be with you.